Chapter 3 The Argosy. After a stomach-plunging return to ground within a leaf-structured capsule, Boss hurried Nathanial out of the headquarters building. "All right, transport, let's see," Boss muttered to himself with increased agitation. "Hey," Nathanial said, trying to get a hold of the situation. "What just happened back there?" But Boss wasn't listening. Boss spotted a booth with an old man sitting behind it and went straight for it. "Boss?" Nathanial tried again, hurrying to keep up. "You hear me? What did you mean you came for permission to take me some other place? You said headquarters, not this other place. You said we'd be home before my mom got back. This wasn't the deal." Boss reached the old man who would look like a beggar if he hadn't been selling something. His long, gray, unkempt beard had bits of twig in it, and his furry, twisted hat kept twitching. "2 for the Argosy, please," Boss said to the toothless geezer as he reached in his pocket for some coin. "Make that 3, Flem said, running in and throwing down 2 gold pieces and a silver. "Tried to salvage what I could back at processing, but the future's looking grim unless we get 'em fixed." "Make that 4, smiled Bunny, tossing something small and squeaky at the old man's hat, which shockingly caught Bunny's toss and engulfed it into its furry recesses. Everyone looked to her quizzically. "What?" she shrugged. "I have a sister in Midtown. That's where you're headed, right?" Boss nodded and went back to his exchange with the old man. "No, wait," Nathanial said, as the old man pushed over 4 tickets. "Make it 3. I'm not going." He pushed one of the tickets back defiantly. The old man started to take it back, but Boss grabbed it and said, "Just a sec." He turned to Nathanial. "Look, you have no idea what we just barely got away from in there." "If you explain it to me, then maybe," Nathanial started, but Boss held up his hand. "I know you think we made a deal back in your room. You talk to my boss, we get you home before your mom notices, you get a wish, and everyone's happy, right?" "Right," Nathanial nodded sternly. "Well, Nathanial, I have to tell you, I didn't take you for a spunk," Boss said, a little impressed, a little annoyed. "What?" Nathanial asked impatiently. "I thought the big man would ask you once what that wish of yours was, you'd spill the beans, and that'd be that. We'd all go back to normal." "Normal? Do you know what normal is for me? It's not normal. You said he'd just make it so I couldn't see you. You said I'd keep my wish," Nathanial protested with his hands on his hips. "I said you'd get a wish, not necessarily your current wish," Boss said with a sigh, and pinched the bridge of his nose. "And that part of the deal would only need to come into play if you didn't spill the beans, so to speak, which is where we find ourselves now." "So what are you saying? You lied?" "I gambled," Boss said pointedly. "And lost. Wouldn't be the first time. But now that you've made it clear how stubborn you are, we must go through with the deal to its fullest and most tiresome extent. But you have to come with me if you want a wish." "I don't want a wish. I want my wish. The wish that's already been granted. It's the only thing I've ever wanted, and so far, it's more than I could have ever dreamed it to be. It's amazing. And you want to take it away from me. Why? Why is this so important to you?"
"It's our livelihood, and you're messing with it, kid. Just listen to me for a second."
Boss bent down and put a hand on Nathaniel's shoulder.
"That sprite in there has ways of getting you to confess your wish and make it obsolete,"
he said, gesturing to the building they just ran from.
"Believe it or not, I don't want this to go down that way. You deserve a wish, but that sprite up there doesn't care if you have one. He's looking for the quickest way to get production back on schedule. Let me take you to Midtown. We can make an exchange. You'll have some time to come up with another wish, and we'll be there to make sure it works for everyone this time. Not just you, but for all of us. I know that might sound harsh, asking you not to be selfish with this decision, but everything you see around here relies on you. It's a lot to ask, but together we can come up with a solution. A compromise.
Listen to him, Factory Nathan. Midtown is the better deal, Flem said, nodding.
Nathaniel groaned. He wasn't sure what choice he really had in the matter. If he refused, then he'd most likely be handed back over to the green blob in the sky for a wish removal, yet trying to imagine an exchange seemed quite as bad. If there had been any other wish worth making, he would have made it on at least one other occasion, but he never had. Not on one star, not on one eyelash, not on any birthday had he ever wished for anything different. But was he being selfish? Did this entire town really rely on him giving up his dream? He thought about his mother and how much she had done for him. She wasn't selfish. She'd dedicated her life to trying to make him better. The eternal optimist, who always let him out on his birthday to see if his immune system had strengthened over the year, always believing that this year would be the year the doctors had promised her when he was a baby, that finally his body would adapt. If only she could see him now. He wanted to ask her advice in that moment. Would she sacrifice a town for him? "What about my mom?" he asked with her still in his thoughts. "You said I'd be back in time." I said she wouldn't notice you were gone, Boss corrected. There's a memory draft over your house. It's an auto-response to a human going through a niche. While you're away, she'll be in a kind of daze, like a lazy forgetfulness. Most humans these days binge-watch on Netflix to cope with the effects. On your return, your absence will feel like nothing more than a dream to her.
"Man," Nathaniel said, shaking his head. "You sprites really are tricky creatures, aren't you?"
Flem snorted.
"Just the tip of the wings, kid. So what'll it be then?" The old man croaked so loudly and suddenly, his hat almost jumped off his head. "Is it 3 or 4?
Boss stood up and looked at Nathaniel for his answer. Nathaniel nodded. 4. He thought it better to continue on this adventure, rather than turn away in fear of none to come. Boss smiled and patted Nathaniel on the back. The old ticket seller jumped off his stool, revealing himself to be a foot shorter than Nathaniel. He gestured to the quartet to follow him. They went through his luggage shop stacked with suitcases crafted of shell from both tree and sea. Cramped between the back shelves hid a spiraled staircase that they single-filed their way down before exiting into a cave-like basement.
"Tickets, please!"
the little old man shouted. Boss gave him back the tickets. The geezer stacked them and rammed them halfway into his hat. There was a crunch. When he pulled the tickets back out, they looked as if the shark from Jaws had used them for a snack. He handed Boss the chomped tickets.
"Now give those to the captain of the Argosy when you get there, and be quick about it. They're loading while you dilly-dally about here in front of me." He unlocked a giant padlock that dangled off a wooden arched door set deeply into the stone. An ancient screech protested with its opening. Nathaniel peered down the revealed tunnel, which mimicked its doorframe in shape. He gawked at the stretching darkness with but a pinprick of light at its end. "What do you think? Should Naderino go first?"
Bunny said, giggling.
"What? Why?"
Nathaniel asked suspiciously.
"Absolutely,"
Flem rang out.
"Tuck and roll,"
the old man said, before headbutting Nathaniel in the back, forcing him through the door. There was a gigantic lurch that pulled every organ, including, and most disturbingly, his skin, in all outward directions as he zoomed through the windy darkness. All Nathaniel could do to keep from screaming was to concentrate on the growing light and believe with all of his might that when he reached it, the sensation would stop. It was as sudden a stop as it had been a start. Nathaniel stood on a bright, grassy hilltop in the middle of nowhere.
Judging by the surroundings, he appeared to be normal-sized again. He took a few uneven steps forward, and it was a good thing he did, too, as Bunny appeared exactly where he had just been. She grabbed him by the shoulders and jumped, giggling away. Then Flem popped into place, quickly stepped aside, and finally Boss appeared. To Nathaniel's awe, everyone had changed. "You guys look almost normal," he said, eyeing the troop as they started walking through the field. It was true. They could all pass for human. Boss was still the tallest of them, about 6 feet tall. His hair was black, his skin was tan, but his eyes were still the lightest shade of blue. Flem had pale white skin, brown hair with streaks of gray, and stood at about a half-foot shorter than Boss. Bunny had changed the least of them. Even the points of her ears were still a little up there. And her eyes, though the pupils were now circles instead of diamonds, still glowed a bright orange past her bronze skin. She wasn't much taller than Nathaniel. He wondered if maybe she was a teen in whatever terms sprites considered a teen.
Let's keep moving,
Boss called back to Nathaniel's slow pace. "Wait, but aren't we back in the real world?" Nathaniel asked. "Real world?" Bunny quoted in a laugh. "It's all the real world, NATO-matic." "I mean, you guys can pass for human now, but..." Nathaniel gestured at their clothes. "I don't know what time period you think you're in." The three of them looked like something plucked right off a 1600s cobblestone street, with earth-tone baggy shirts and pants, leather boots and belts, and Flem sported a rather floppy brown hat.
It isn't about what time period we think we're in,
Boss said rather cryptically, and kept moving ahead. "How did you change your clothes, though? I mean, it's one thing to change your skin like a chameleon, but how'd you do the clothes?" Nathaniel asked in attempt to rationalize the situation. "It's called a sprite trick, Nady." Bunny smiled and bounce-stepped as she spoke. "Just messing with those funny receptors you got sending signals to your brain behind those pretty browns of yours. Same kind of thing that can make us invisible to you, only this one you haven't learned to see through yet." Nathaniel had to jog to keep up with the troop as they headed down the hill's edge. He couldn't help but to smile at the feeling of grass on his fingertips while curiously pondering the salt taste of the air. When he reached the apex of the next hill, he found below him a town that matched its 1600s cobblestone streets to the clothes that the sprites wore. Beyond the expanse of white sand beach below stretched an old-fashioned port town. Shops built mainly from wood hugged the coast for maybe a half-mile. 4 massive sailing ships were at port on the far side of the buildings. Nathaniel could just see their rope-strung masts swaying above the rooftops. Nathaniel thought he was in one of his dreams. Quickly, he scooted down the sandy hill to catch up with the sprites and bombard them with his excited questions. "This is amazing! Did we, travel back in time or something?" he asked, out of breath. Bunny laughed and said, "No, cutie patootie, we didn't travel in time. They are in a time bubble. We use spots like these to travel places you can't go by niche. Humans of this time period are more in tune with our kind. Makes transactions easier." "Time bubble?" Nathaniel repeated. "So we didn't travel in time, but what, they're stuck in time?" "It's just a bubble where space and time move slower. Totally natural. No biggie. Just wait till you hear about the ship we are going on. It sails through the..."
Bunny,
Boss scolded, bringing them to a stop.
you can't explain everything to him. There's no way a human can understand how to jump a niche, or how a time bubble works, or anything beyond their human short-sightedness. These things were lost to his kind centuries ago. We gave up the ability to include them in our lives the day we signed the crossing treaty, so just stop. He doesn't need to know anything.
Boss looked a little sorry about his sudden fury, but turned without looking at Nathaniel and walked on. Nathaniel didn't know what to think. Where did that anger come from? He had agreed to come on this trip, hadn't he? Boss should be thankful, not yelling at Bunny for trying to explain the craziness around them. Nathaniel realized he had fallen behind again and saw Bunny waiting for him at the town entrance. He quickened his pace to meet her.
"Don't let the man get you down," she said, patting him on the head. "He's right in a way. There's no way I could explain everything to you. That would take a lifetime, and you'd have to be a sprite to utilize the info anyway."
She started to look around, then said,
"Hang here a tat."
It was a funny sight to watch Bunny dart from vendor to vendor. Each time she made a trade with a shopkeeper, she would return to Nathaniel and place a new piece of clothing over his old. There was a large worn-out leather hat plopped on his head, a puffy white shirt pulled over his torso. A pretty cool leather jacket with removable arm sleeves was slung over his shoulders. A pair of black pants that fluffed a bit at the thighs was awkwardly pulled up over his jeans and tied up with a rope belt. Then a pair of brown laced-up boots reaching his mid-calf replaced his sneakers. Bunny's last trade took longer than the rest. It looked like she really had to bargain for the item, which came from an old woman with crazy gray hair and dead seagulls hanging from her shop roof. Bunny came back with the object wrapped in a furry rag and held it out in both hands to him. With a pretty smile, she said,
"Happy birthday."
Nathaniel took the furry thing with a blush and said, "Wow, Bunny. Thanks, you didn't have to."
"I know,"
she bounced in reply. Nathaniel just held the gift, looking at it for a long moment. He had forgotten it was still his birthday with all the new things that were happening. And it wasn't just that. He'd never had anyone that wasn't family give him a gift before. He smiled and unwrapped it. There lay a black leather sheath below a gold and silver hilt engraved with what looked like a hunting scene, or was it a battle? Some of the men seemed to be wearing armor, but whatever they were charging toward was not depicted as they spiraled up the smooth surface with their spears and swords. Nathaniel pulled the hilt from the sheath to reveal a beautiful 6-inch-long silver blade that glinted in the sunlight. "Whoa," Nathaniel said, amazed at the sight. "It's beautiful." He thought on that morning when his mom had, for the first time, suggested he cut the cake. She had never trusted him with a knife before, and he didn't blame her. He had been lucky not to stab himself in the eye when he had coughed. And now, a complete stranger was giving him a knife, but there was not a cake in sight. Nathaniel furrowed his brows and asked, "Do you think I'm going to need this for something?"
"You're going on a voyage. I'm sure you'll have to cut a rope or something. Every good sailor needs a knife."
She winked at him.
"And here's a little jingle in case of an emergency."
She took one of many tie-string pouches off her belt and tied it to one of Nathaniel's pant loops, then waved him forward.
"Come on, matey. Let's scoot."
Nathaniel had been preoccupied sliding his sheath onto his rope belt while he followed Bunny down the dock, so that when he looked up again, his jaw dropped for about the 100th time that day. This time he caught himself and quickly closed it before a fly got in. A massive ship was getting ready to sail before him. 3 masts stood high with many yards still holding tight to their sails. Wooden ramps slanted down to the dock where sailors carried barrels to and from the ship. The crates, too large to carry, were being lifted onto the bow by a pulley system. "Okay," Nathaniel concluded aloud. "This is officially unbelievable." He slapped his cheek several times and blinked while shaking his head. Bunny put her arm around him and said,
"Just the tip of the rat's tail."
Nathaniel walked up a plank with Bunny right behind him. Boss was already on the deck, talking in a strange tongue to a large tattooed man who held the tickets but didn't look happy about it. Nathaniel found himself staring at the man's black eyes and the large bone in his nose. He reached the top of the plank, and the dark eyes looked directly back into his with a jolt. There was not a hint of a smile in those eyes. Nathaniel quickly looked away and moved on, pretending he saw something interesting on the far side of the boat.
Flem had already taken a seat on a rice bag and kicked his feet up on the mid-mast. Immediately, a sailor came up and pushed Flem's feet down, yelling something in a different language. Bunny rushed over to ease the situation. Nathaniel started to follow when a small hand pulled on his shoulder to stop him. "Don't," a girl's voice said in his ear. "You don't want to draw attention to yourself." Nathaniel turned curiously toward the accented voice. He looked into another pair of dark eyes, but these exuded a kindness and compassion that the tattooed man's never could. She was about an inch taller than him, maybe 13 or 14 years old, with brown curly hair and a splash of freckles on her olive skin nose. She wore high boots like his own, but with tighter pants and a leather vest over her white puffy shirt. "Are you a sprite?" she asked quietly. "No. Are you?" She shook her head. "No, but those you came with are," she added. "How do you know that?" Nathaniel asked, thinking their disguises had been pretty solid. "A sprite brought me here as well. He used similar tickets to get us aboard. You are like me. There is something we want that they don't." "Really?" Nathaniel asked, dumbfounded to find someone else in his situation. "They do this kind of thing a lot? Take kids' wishes away?" The girl shrugged. "I don't know how often they do it, but what I do know is when something gets in the way of a sprite's job, he or she knows how to get rid of that blockade. And right now, it is you and me they are in the process of ridding." Nathaniel groaned. "You think it's that bad? My sprites have acted like they are trying to help, considering the alternative of this big green dude just taking what he wants anyway. Well, help might be too strong a word, but I don't feel like they're trying to get rid of me so much as come to a compromise. You see, since my current wish doesn't work for them, and they said I'll be sent to the loony bin if I keep seeing them, then really it's for the best if we try this exchange thing. That's where we're going, to Midtown, to get my wish exchanged." He wasn't sure why he felt the need to say all that, but her widening eyes during his talk just made everything blurt out. "I'm going to Midtown too, but I refuse to exchange. You agreed to that?" asked the girl with shock on her face. A tall man in a black cloak appeared behind the girl. His eyes were in shadow, but his grim mouth sneered with thick, menacing lips. Her entire demeanor changed at his presence. She shrunk down into herself and backed away with the man at her side. "Wait, what?" Nathaniel's stomach dropped as he helplessly watched her being led away. He wanted to talk to her some more. He had been excited to find someone like him who seemed to know what was going on, and it appeared as though she was about to give him some advice. He needed to talk to her again. Nathaniel looked back to where Bunny had gone to help Flem, in hopes to ask her if she knew anything about the strange girl and cloaked man that must be the sprite that brought her on board. Bunny was continuing to calm Flem's situation by mocking his leisurely attitude and making the formerly disgruntled sailor laugh. She gave Nathaniel a pat on the back when he joined them, but Boss came up to his side and bent to his level before he could address Bunny.
"Hey,"
Boss said with a sigh.
"how you doing?"
Nathaniel was a little put off by the sudden kindness. His last interaction with Boss had been cold in regards to Bunny's attempted explanations to Nathaniel. Was this Boss's way of saying sorry for having an uncalled-for hissy fit earlier? "Fine," Nathaniel answered shortly, still waiting for the other shoe to drop.
"Look, I want you to stay close to me on this voyage, or at least one of us three. Maybe Bunny. You like her, right?"
Nathaniel squinted at him and gave a nod.
"Don't talk to anyone else, and try not to make eye contact. Just lie low,"
Boss said with a wink and a pat on the back. Just lie low, Nathaniel thought. The girl had said not to draw any attention to himself. What was with all the gloom and doom on this ship? There was only one type of sailor he could think of that should cause this kind of caution. "What is this? Like some sort of pirate ship or something?" he started, when he spotted a man with a peg leg and an eye patch clunk by. "No way," said Nathaniel in a whisper, staring the man down.
Boss snapped his fingers in front of Nathaniel's gaze, as if to say, no staring either. It was about a half an hour more of securing the crates before the ship readied to make way. But when it did, it was quite the sight to see. Massive fabric sails dropped as a dozen men pulled on ropes. Commands were being called throughout the length of the boat, and Nathaniel had to push himself into a corner to make sure he didn't get knocked over by the men rushing around him. He'd never realized how extraordinary it was to operate such a large vessel solely by the sweat of men harnessing the wind. However, it didn't take long for the amazement Nathaniel felt to be overrun by something else he hadn't taken into consideration: seasickness. They had only been out to sea for maybe an hour. The coastline hadn't even disappeared, and yet Nathaniel was stuck in another corner with his face hanging over the edge. He'd managed to hold it all in to this point. He was kind of running on an empty stomach as it was, but he was sure it would only take one more big sway to push that last bit of cereal over the edge.
"You don't look so good," said the accented voice of the dark-eyed girl from behind him.
Nathaniel turned to see her looking at him pitifully, and a rush of butterflies swarmed away his queasiness. It took him a moment to notice she held something small, milky brown, and possibly food-like out toward him. The thought of consuming anything just then filled his mouth with watery bile. "I don't feel so good." Nathaniel strained the words out before turning back to his beloved corner.
"This is for you."
She shook the object in her hands. Nathaniel looked at it again and asked, "What is it?"
"Ginger root. It will calm your stomach. A few of the newer sailors use it before they get their sea legs. I've been at sea for about a week. I think I'm finally getting mine, so I want you to have this bit I was using. Just chew on the soft yellow middle. It's a little strong, but it really works."
Nathaniel took the root from her hand and smelled it. It seemed kind of familiar. It made him think of the time his mom attempted to make Thai food for their Cuisines Around the World week. He nibbled it. "Thanks, I'll try anything at this point," he said with a nose crinkle. She laughed, then hesitated.
"Sorry if I freaked you out earlier,"
she said with a crooked smile. Nathaniel nodded, still not really able to articulate properly.
"My name's Aaliyah. What's yours?"
Nathaniel swallowed difficultly and said, "Nathaniel, but my online friends call me Nathan or Nate."
Aaliyah nodded and said, "Oh, choices. I guess I'll just have to see what comes natural when I call for you."
Nathaniel laughed shortly and said, "Just as long as you don't get as clever as Bunny. She can't seem to decide on anyone's name."
"Bunny? That must be the girl sprite who came with you?"
"Yeah, she's really nice. She gave me a birthday gift," Nathaniel said, moving back his long jacket to reveal the knife on his belt.
"Oh, it's your birthday?"
Aaliyah smiled and Nathaniel nodded.
"Happy birthday."
"Thanks." Nathaniel smirked. Aaliyah kept her eyes quizzically on the knife and said,
"I guess that makes sense. You made a wish today. Maybe the gift has something to do with that, or maybe she just likes you. Have you known Bunny long?"
"No," Nathaniel said with a shrug. "Just met her today. Just met all of them today. You said you've been on the boat for a week? How long do you think it takes from here to get to Midtown?"
"Oh, I haven't been on this boat for a week. Just at sea that long. I think my sprite is a Nixie. They live on the water. But he didn't tell me how long this voyage would be. He doesn't tell me much of anything."
"Then how do you know so much about them?" Nathaniel asked, intrigued.
It's a long story. Basically, my father took in an old wise woman when my mom died to help raise me and my sister, you know. I was just a babe, and my sister is only a couple of years older than me. Anyway, she had me call her ma tante, and she used to tell me the best bedtime stories, all about the sprites. As a child, it was easy to believe the stories, even though my papa disapproved. I think he thought I'd grow out of it. But when it came time for me to question things, the stories Papa told seemed just as unbelievable as the ones from ma tante. I tried to rationalize, so I would test them both. And when I'd ask Papa, why can't we do this on that day? He would just say, because the book says, without any real specific reason as to why. Yet when I asked ma tante, why does my foot tingle so bad when I uncross it? She would say, that's the sprite Yareel come to make and take the tingles to put bubbles in her soup. Or I'd ask, why is Papa's hair falling out? And she'd answer, that's the sprite Reduc come to take his hair and sew it into a fashionable hat. They both laughed. Sounds pretty ridiculous, Nathaniel said at the end of his chuckle. Yeah, but at least she had answers, Aaliyah said, her giggle faltering into a serious thought. Over the years, her sprite stories only became more involved. There were battles and governments and laws. I just didn't think she could keep it all straight if none of it was based in some truth. She was the one that had me start my 10-year wish when I was just 3 years old. It's the most powerful of all wishes, you know. I don't think she expected all of this exchange nonsense to apply. In fact, I'd be willing to bet it's a new development. Nothing is supposed to counter such a powerful wish. How did you know about the 10-year wish? The 10-year wish? Nathaniel repeated. Just then, Boss stepped between them.
I need to speak with you, Nathaniel,
Boss said seriously. Nathaniel looked wide-eyed as he followed Boss. He chanced a glance back at Aaliyah, who stared back worriedly. What's up, Boss? Nathaniel asked when they stopped on the other side of the boat.
What did I tell you?
Boss asked in that annoying adult scolding tone. Stay close to you guys? Bunny was like 10 feet.
I said not to talk to anyone.
Boss cut in. I thought you meant the pirate dudes, Nathaniel defended.
No, I meant everyone. And actually, if you need clarification, especially don't talk to that girl.
What? Why?
Because, Nathaniel.
You can't just say, because. Boss sighed and pinched the bridge of his nose, shaking his head, and finally said,
It's for your own good. We are only on this boat for a short time. You're never going to see her again after today, so there's no point in making a friend of her, okay?
Now Nathaniel shook his head. He didn't want to say okay. It didn't make sense. She's supposed to be going to the same place we are, he muttered.
They're not,
Boss said flatly. Does she know that? He worriedly questioned.
It's not our business.
They stood there in tense silence for a moment. Nathaniel glanced to where he had left Aaliyah, but she was no longer there.
Bunny?
Boss called across the ship and gestured her over.
Keep an eye on him, please,
he said, walking off at her arrival. Nathaniel glared at Boss's back as he went. Uh-oh, said Bunny. What's Big Hoss Boss done now? Nothing, Nathaniel said, pulling his glare away. You're looking better. She smoothly changed subjects. Nathaniel looked at the ginger in his hand and said with surprise, Huh, it really does work. He tried to spot Aaliyah again, but with no luck. There were dozens of broad-shouldered backs blocking his view of most of the ship. Hey, have you seen the decks below? Bunny asked with a nudge on the shoulder. Nathaniel followed Bunny down a darkening stairway. She led him through a skinny hall with a few doors on their left. Every so often, there was a glass lamp burning on the wall. The ceiling was low. Nathaniel thought it was a good thing he and Bunny were still less than 5 feet tall, or they would be pretty uncomfortable. Bunny pushed one of the small doors open, went in, and waited for Nathaniel to join her before she closed it again. They were in a tiny room with only 2 bunk beds nailed to the wall beside them. This is cool, Nathaniel said, uncertain as to why Bunny had taken him in this room, but under the impression that he should be impressed. Yeah, can you believe people sleep in here? Bunny laughed. I know a couple of sprites that like making and collecting the mildew in sailors' toenails, she said enthusiastically. Ew, Nathaniel responded. It makes for great anti-itch cream, she said with a vigorous nod. But they have to be careful not to cause foot rot. Anyway, I need to show you something with your knife. She held out her hand. Oh, Nathaniel said, surprised, and reached down to untie his belt. He handed her the knife. She unsheathed it. Hold out your hand, she said, holding the blade high. Nathaniel didn't like the look of this. He glared wide-eyed at the blade in the air and uncertainly back at Bunny. She nodded for him to do as told. He slowly raised his hand, palm up. Bunny suddenly moved the knife above his hand, blade pointing down, and dropped it. He tried to pull away, but Bunny had gripped his arm to keep his hand in the path of the falling point. Nathaniel screamed, closed his eyes, and anticipated the stabbing. In that moment, he wondered why he had lifted his hand. Why had he followed this girl into a dark, secluded place? Why did he trust a stranger? Because she had been nice to him? Aaliyah was right. He was being rid of. But as the moment passed, there was no pain. Nathaniel slowly opened one eye, then the other. Bunny let go of his arm. The blade was hovering over his palm, hilt aiming toward the ceiling, point almost touching his skin. Perfect, Bunny said. What? Nathaniel muttered. It's a battle blade. It only works if you've got real gumption, she said with a quick hit on the shoulder. Congratulations. Huh? You mean you were testing if I had gumption? He asked with a shrug of uncertainty at the word. And you weren't really sure if this blade would run through my hand or not? Bunny laughed and said, I've seen enough souls to know yours has that special something-something. Don't worry, Nadaruni. But why would you want to give me something like this? Nathaniel asked, thinking back on Aaliyah's suggestion that it might have something to do with his wish. It was a great deal. The seagull lady had no idea what it could do. I couldn't pass it up. Besides, it's something I know you'll find useful, and useful things make the best birthday gifts. She lifted her hands up like that settled the matter. Anywho, say Bradula. Bradula, Nathaniel mimicked closely. The knife twirled on the spot before it suddenly stopped, then glided down softly to lie flat in his hand. Whoa, what was that about? Nathaniel asked, a little freaked. See the direction it's pointing? Bunny responded. Yeah, that's the way you're supposed to go. Nathaniel stared at her, waiting for more explanation, but she seemed to think that was good enough. Bunny turned and said, We better get back up top. A storm's a-brewin'. She opened the door and exited. Nathaniel quickly sheathed his new magic dagger, slipped it on his belt, and chased Bunny down. By the time he caught up with her, they were on the top deck, and the dark clouds rolling overhead blew all other thoughts away.